Hi everyone, my name is Azhar, and I'm here from Imperial College of London with Anna and Jackie. And today I'm going to tell you about the project that I did with Rachel, Edward, Ananda, and Anna last year. So briefly, as we have pointed out today, energy sector essentially falls short when it comes to diversity in the workforce. And in this project, we particularly focus on scientific publications within the energy sector because we believe that lack of diversity within scientific publications can lead to, first of all, not only biased decision-making, but also underexplored research avenues, which essentially leads to slower pace of advancements in the field. So in this project, we tried to gather the data because that was also one of the problems that we had from the relevant energy sector publication industries. And then we tried to analyze and assess the gender dynamics within these scientific publications, and also analyze the thematic focus of female and male researchers and whether it differs. So when it comes to methodology, because we were working with a lot of text and a lot of textual information, we also wanted to make sure that we can quantify this data and somehow come up with certain numbers that justify us so that we don't just go with like potential confirmation bias of what we to believe in. And essentially, we did that by employing several statistical methods, but also by using natural language processing. So the following journals were chosen, and we took the basically publications from these journals for the past 10, 13 years. And we focused mostly on the UK affiliated researchers in order to narrow down the problem, because as you can imagine, there's many publications. That's a lot of data to work with. So in order to make sure that we look at more like concrete problem relevant, for example, to the United Kingdom, we were looking at these 5 journals. And the reason we chose them is because we believe that they represent the most important kind of like sectors of energy, and they have relevant content to us. So when it came to actually getting these publications, we used Elsevier's API, which allows you to actually download all of them using the metadata that we filtered based on the affiliations and the years. And then we also used bibliometrics package, which allows you to get more information on the impact of the research, which was also important to us because we wanted to make sure that we can understand whether there were differences in how different publications were acknowledged or mentioned, captured in whatever social media or other blog posts and so on. So as you can imagine, the general trend was that there is a prevalent number of male researchers in the field. And the numbers at first did not look great. And actually, we had to do a lot of normalization in our further analysis because we believe that it skewed a lot of our results at first. But after starting to look more at like normalized metrics and kind of the ratios of female and male authorship in the industry, there were several insights. First of all, across most of the publications, male authors tend to have relatively stable ratios across the years compared to female ones. Female authorship representation varied across the years a lot, and the only journal that showed quite interesting constant improvement in terms of female representation was solar energy, but we're going to talk about this one later because we found it very interesting. We also looked at whether there's a correlation between the gender of the first author and the impact metrics that were got in our data sets. And initially, before we normalized the results, because there were many more male researchers, obviously the citations count, usages, and captures were mostly prevalent for male researchers. However, after normalization, we noticed that actually, in some cases, female authors are doing quite well as well. In certain years, you can even see that their research was captured at a more prevalent scale than, for example, their male colleagues. Another thing that we were interested in, if there was any correlation between the gender of the first author and subsequent co-authors. So in terms of the proportions of kind of like how many female, male people are there in the team. And in general, there wasn't no significant correlation between those two factors. On the contrary, what we noticed is that most researchers tend to collaborate with people that they collaborated with in the past, right? So that kind of made more sense. However, we looked into it later on when we tried to do network analysis. So when we were looking at research topics and themes, because we had publications from different energy sectors, we wanted to look at how we can actually kind of like distinguish them based on like female or male authorship. And for that, we used topic modeling methods. And essentially what they do is that like they consume a lot of text within themselves, and they can provide you like themes within those collection of texts that they think were the most kind of important ones. And there are different ways of doing that. There is more like randomized methods, and there are also methods which, for example, you could put more importance towards certain things. For example, how often this word was repeated or something of that sort. And essentially from this analysis, we noticed that in general, male researchers, particularly, for example, in solar energy publication, they tend to focus more kind of like on broader systems and applications of certain technology. Whether female researchers tended to focus on more foundational knowledge and more towards material sciences of, for example, solar technology in our case. Also, some of the words are not highlighted here. Sorry, that must have been my mistake when I was copying it. But yeah. And then from there, we realized that the reason that solar energy must be doing so well at improving their female representation is essentially not necessarily because they actually have more like different policies than other journals, but because this journal has more themes that are relevant for female researchers where they can contribute to. So their kind of like access to this journal in a way is easier than compared to other ones which are more focused on special research. We went deeper than that, and we also looked at different pre-trained models, which were trained, for example, on Google News articles or Wikipedia articles. And we wanted to see how the keywords that we expected to be most relevant to the publications that we were looking into, how they were associated with either female or male pronouns. And when it came to most of them, it looked like, yeah, essentially most of the words were associated mostly with male pronouns rather than the female ones, which suggests that essentially the data that was used to train these models in the first place, so the news articles, the Wikipedia articles, and etc., they still have this inherent bias of thinking that something is more male associated rather than female associated. And then just to be sure, we also tried to train our own model, but for that, we just used the publications that we had, because the publication that we had, they had like mostly formal language utilized in them. And after doing that, we realized that when you're using the data that is gender neutral and has diverse language, there is no inherent kind of like associations like that there. So what Rachel and Edward did is essentially they went one step deeper than that, and they wanted to see if they could identify bias and toxicity in very popular these days large language models. And essentially, that investigation led them to find out that large language models, no matter how much they're trying to be developed these days, they also have small inherent biases on the themes and topics that people associate with a certain gender. And the reason for that being is the data that they've been trained on. And this is why there's actually a lot of interesting cases in the news where, I don't know if you know, but for example, Google, they tried to develop their new AI image model, but they tried to make it so diverse that it led to another extreme where it became, it would come up with certain things that just not historically accurate. So yeah, and they also looked at more like network collaboration between different researchers, because as we looked previously, we noticed that a lot of the researchers tended to collaborate with the people they already collaborated with in the past, or they would utilize their own research that they did in the past as well. And from this kind of like analyzing it from more like network graph perspective, they detected that essentially female researchers, they tend to be very interconnected with one another. And also they have lower centrality scores, which essentially means that they have limited integration into bigger main collaboration networks with others, which is worrying. So the main conclusions that we've done from this is that there are certain publications where there are approvals at improving the representation. However, there are also outdated perceptions and bias that we have still in the language that we use, and the language that particularly is used to, for example, train new models to conduct further research for all sorts of purposes. And we think that it's something important to tackle, something important to make sure is avoided, because, well, to a certain degree, but it's also like important to make sure that we're not inheriting this bias following on in the future work. That essentially we're trying to improve it, make it better in terms of information and data, because, well, yeah, it's important in our day and age. In general, yes, these were the main conclusions. And then for future research directions, first one is data enrichment, because as I said in the very beginning, we were limiting down the scope because it had a lot of information there. But it would be interesting to look at how the situation differs, for example, for different regions, and also look for other dimensions, because we looked only from gender perspective, but there are also many other perspectives that could potentially influence as well. Another thing is also kind of looking more into like semantic aspect, which, for example, could be done with peer review articles or something like that. Last but not least, I think it's also important to look further into collaboration networks and see, again, how it differs, for example, from region to region, how it differs, for example, for other scientific publications, and not only in terms of gender, but also in terms of other factors like nationality, where the people are affiliated, and so on and so on. So yeah, those were the main things.